Most importantly, I want to welcome you all to the Fall Food Systems Seminar. The theme, of course, is the biodiversity of food systems. My name is Yona Sipos. I'm your instructor, and I'll have a chance to introduce myself in just a minute. But I wanted to start this seminar and this first class with a Land and First Peoples acknowledgement. Now, probably, hopefully, this is not the first time you've heard a land acknowledgement, especially at the University of Washington, right? As an institution, the University of Washington spent time to understand where this institution is situated and acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land. The land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Puyallup, Suquamish, Tulalip, Muckleshoot, and Duwamish nations. You can find out more about how to find out about the indigenous peoples of this land and land all over the world at the website native-land.ca. What you probably have also started to either think about or hear about is that acknowledgements are only the very beginning, and they do not go nearly far enough. And so one of the things that this seminar does, that I strive to do in this seminar, is to center traditional ecological knowledge as absolutely foundational and as a science, as a way of knowing that is equal to, in terms of its strengths, and essential for Western science as well. If you are interested in learning more about going beyond land acknowledgements, beyond acknowledging the land and the First Peoples, there is a self-paced course that you can sign up for. It costs $25, and I bet your departments would be interested in finding ways to help you find that money. It's taught by an Oglala Lakota scholar, Megan Redshirt Shaw, and it explores land acknowledgements, the occupation of Native nations, the land back movement, and importantly for all of us here, the role of higher education in all of this. So our first speaker, our first guest speaker next week is Dr. Derek Jennings, and he'll be able to really extend our collective understanding and thinking into this topic. But I just wanted to make sure that we started there with that common understanding. We'll come back to that throughout the quarter. Before we get into the bulk of today, I'm going to run through a couple of announcements for you. I hope if you are here, that means you're feeling well. And I hope if you are not feeling well today or in the future, you will please stay home. That is what the university is asking you to do. In-person attendance is expected and really required, especially to honor our visiting guest speakers. But if you need to miss a seminar, the recordings will be available within 24 hours. Also, unfortunately, the word pivot has not left our collective vocabulary, and it may still be necessary in the future, so please make sure that Canvas messages are connected to your email and that you check those before you show up in class in case any changes are needed. Since pivot, the word pivot has not left our collective vocabulary, that is a reason, and there are many other reasons why you might need some support. Please know that the university knows that and is ready with resources to support you, so you can check out this slide as you need it, but know that there are counseling resources on campus, there are national counseling services for students, and we have an on-campus and in-community food pantry for those who are in need. Okay, once your basic needs can be met, then hopefully you will have the opportunity to look around and start to engage in really cool activities that are happening on and around campus. I have just a few up here on the slide that are happening. All of these are happening today, actually, after seminar. So there's a Dog Days Food Systems walking tour, there's a UW Farm volunteer party, and there's even a Green Jobs, Green Futures Summit tonight in the city. So check those out at your leisure. And then I have one more announcement that I wanted to get in front of you by two students who are taking over the reins of the North American Food Systems Network this quarter.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Jordan.
My name is Caitlin.
We're two students here. We are the co-chairs of the UW student chapter of NAFSN, the North American Food Systems Network. Our student chapter and RSO seeks to do some networking opportunities for students, some professional development opportunities, and also working on a local food systems project this quarter. Our first meeting is next Tuesday in Wright Hall from 5 to 6 p.m. Please come if you're at all interested, no commitment needed. And we also have some flyers with more details over here on the table to grab on your way out.
We also have an Instagram, UW NASFN, UW and then NAFSN, so that you can follow as well if you want more information or updates.
It's just a great way to get involved in local food systems here. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Excellent. Yes, we'll give them a round of applause. Thank you. That was brave, the first students in our class to speak up. So we will have more opportunities beyond that. Thank you both. And I'm looking forward to a year of really cool programming that's coming out of the chapter this year. All right. For the rest of you, I want to invite you to open up your Poll Everywhere and get ready to contribute in just a few slides. So I'm at pollev.com/Sipos, and then there'll be a few multiple choice slides and then a few word cloud slides. And if you would like to input a phrase, then just know the words will stay together if you input them with underscores between the words, as here, as below. Okay. With that, on to our regularly scheduled programming. Welcome to the seminar. We're going to introduce the teaching team to you, and you'll have a chance to meet each other. And then I will launch into a mini lecture on an introduction to biodiversity of food systems. We'll go over the syllabus, the schedule. We might not have time for questions about the logistics today, but we will be available via Canvas if there are any questions beyond. All right, so my name is Yona. You can call me Dr. Sipos. You can call me Dr. Yona. You can call me Yona, right? Lots of options. I will respond. I am an associate teaching professor in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences. I teach primarily in the Food Systems, Nutrition, and Health major and program. I'm the co-chair of the UW Farm Advisory Committee with Dr. Eli Wheat, who will be one of our presenters later this quarter and who some of you may know from other fabulous courses that he teaches. And I'm a member of the Center for One Health Research, among other activities across campus. Most of my work is teaching, but I do engage in research, particularly around community food systems and urban food systems, with a focus on critical community-engaged scholarship and food justice. In my spare time, just kidding, my most important job is that I'm a mom. And so once in a while, you will see a small person with me in this lecture hall when things come up. But my job while I'm here is to be a resource for you. So even though I do all these other things in the rest of my life, of course, I'm here for you first and foremost. With that, when I'm not here for you first and foremost, and in order to communicate most effectively with the teaching team, I'll ask you to first communicate with your fabulous reader grader and Jorge Rivera Gonzalez. I would like to ask you to introduce yourself.
Hi everybody, my name is Jorge. I'm a second year PhD student at the OHS, Environmental and Occupational Health. I'm here to help you all be successful and succeed in life. So please feel free to reach out if you need any questions, need any help with anything. I'm just one, there's a lot of you, so I'll do my best to keep in touch and help as much as I can. I'm really excited for all of us to learn together, just like you. I'm here and looking forward to all these lectures, and I'll be participating in all of them. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes. Oh, you are such a warm and welcoming crowd. This is lovely. Thank you so much, Jorge, and to the class. All right, folks. Hopefully, Poll Everywhere is available to you. Yes. If you are having trouble logging on, then just raise your hand or ask your neighbor. But hopefully, you can just respond with your area of study, and we'll get to see the distribution. The nice thing about this seminar is that we get students from all over campus. This seminar began as a nutrition seminar and has evolved over time into the Food Systems, Nutrition, and Health seminar, and it really speaks to the multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary nature of these topics that we get interest from across campus. Mostly in this room, we have College of Arts and Sciences and School of Public Health represented, but we've got engineers, business, the information school, nursing, med, pre-med, built environment, Foster School of Business, Evans, what did I miss? You're all here. So thank you so much for your interest, and really look around the room and see this as an opportunity to also connect with different ways of knowing and different ways of thinking. You all bring your own paradigmatic knowledge of the world and of the food system, and we want to know how you think, and we encourage you to be open to experiencing the interdisciplinarity of these topics. All right, next question. Does your area of study relate to biodiversity? Okay, let's see. So far, yes is in the lead, which I really wasn't sure how this question was going to land. All right. Give you like 10 more seconds. Wow. So, not counting the not sures, we've got 2/3 of you indicating that your area of study relates to biodiversity. That's quite phenomenal, so I'm really happy to hear that. And those of you who are not sure, this is a question that you might be interested in exploring, right? Like, if this is a topic that is or becomes near and dear to your heart, is there a way to integrate it with your broader area of study? Okay, same question, but relating to food systems. Does your area of study relate to food systems? Obviously, there's a food systems, nutrition, and health major, but there are so many other ways to study food systems at this university. Do you see yourself here? Well, okay. So for this one, it's closer to a 50-50 split. Oh, wrong. Maybe 60-40. But a lot of you feel like you have already some connection with food systems study. And for those of you who don't, well, welcome, and I'm so excited to open this world for you. All right, let's think beyond the classroom. Favorite outdoor activities. So this is a word cloud. You can attach words with their underscores. Beautiful. So I really see a mix of activities that happen in maybe natural environments, built environments, urban, peri-urban, rural environments, right? So like lots of different ways to engage, and think about whether your activities happen in areas where biodiversity is an enhancement to that activity. So just planting some ideas here in your mind. Thank you for responding. We'll move on to the next one, which is about your favorite meal. Again, out of the classroom. So do you have a favorite meal where you're able to incorporate, or you do incorporate, local ingredients, heritage ingredients, so foods that aren't necessarily local to here, but they're local to other regions and they're heritage crops, or wild foods? Are there any foods that you forage out in the wild, or that you perhaps buy that someone else has foraged, that you incorporate into meals? Salmon, a rather iconic dish for our region that both contributes to and completely relies on biodiverse environments, right? Great example. Lovely. Okay, sushi, of course, we can make the same connection there with the seafood that's required, and we had a great speaker in this seminar several years ago on sustainable sushi and how to make those meals really connected to place and to long-term sustainability. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of these, but this is great. And as you think about the meals that really speak to you, think about the ingredients, where they come from, what their origin stories are, how they're raised, what they're raised with, right? Who raises them, how they're moved through the supply chain and get to your plate. All right, finally, for now, if you support biodiversity, how do you do that? Do you support it by noticing and appreciating biodiversity in all sorts of different ecosystems, natural or managed? Do you actively garden or steward an area to enhance or promote biodiversity? Do you financially support or volunteer with conservation organizations, or just generally feel supportive of those movements? Do you support farmers who are growing polycultures or multi-crop species? Or is there some other way that you support biodiversity? In which case, I'll be curious what else I should add to this list for next time. And if none of the above, that's okay too. So just place yourself there. You maybe are only able to answer once. I might not have clicked the right box for you all. All right, so I see that there are some big fans of biodiversity in the room, noticing and appreciating biodiversity, and also those who are making moves to think about how to use their dollars to support local biodiverse environments through food choices. So, excellent. There are a lot of ways to support biodiversity, and we're going to talk about that specifically, of course, in relation to the food system. And if you don't already do it, or if there are just a couple of boxes that you might have checked in this question, maybe by the end of the seminar, you'll have ideas about how you, your communities, and our collective society can move more toward biodiversity conservation. And we'll talk about why that's important, especially with respect to food systems. But first, I want to hear what you think. So I'm going to ask you now to turn to your neighbor or neighbors, so at least one, if not two people around you. Everyone should be engaged in conversation. Share your names, your pronouns if you'd like. I think did I share my pronouns? I use she, her. Your program and the year that you're in. And then generally, what is your interest in biodiversity and food systems? Some of you may be here for the credit. I get that and I respect it. But for a lot of you, there may have been something about a food systems, nutrition, and health seminar, or even the theme of biodiversity of food systems that really speaks to your soul. Share that with your neighbor, and then I'll ask for your input after that. So we'll have just about a minute for this quick conversation. $15 more seconds. Wrapping up the last sentence. I'm sorry to cut you off. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. Please note these thoughts down, and we'll be able to come back to this word cloud that we co-generate right now at the end of the quarter so that we can see if there are more interests that occupy this space, if there's more that has inspired you or an area that you want to go deeper into. So very interested to learn where you all are at right now in terms of what you are hoping to learn, what are your big questions, what are your interests within this theme. Yes, I love it. So everything from broad themes like sustainability and health to questions about how you can get involved and what are opportunities to engage in and support biodiversity in food systems, and then a lot about the food supply chain broadly and the specifics throughout, about workers. I think I saw processing, farming and food, of course, urban environments. There's a lot that's in here that I'm really delighted to tell you that we will be covering. And so I hope that you'll be able to hold on to these interests of yours, find ways to investigate them through the quarter, and keep your minds open to topics and themes that you might not even yet know exist. This seminar is really just an opportunity to give you a glimpse into many potential worlds of deep community building, deep programmatic potential, and deep research needs, okay? So each one of these seminars that we're going to be able to share together over the next 10 or so weeks are really going to be probably looking at multiple areas of your interests at the same time, and hopefully helping to expand this list even beyond. So thank you for your contributions so far. I'm going to move into giving you some content about biodiversity and food systems, and then we're going to wrap up with some time on the schedule that I was just referring to and the syllabus and expectations. So about half of you already have degree programs where food systems is an area of study. But for all of us, so that we're on the same page, know that food systems are comprised of multiple, interconnected, and interdependent systems, right? They incorporate energy and nutrient flows that are facilitated by people through food supply chains. So a really simple way of depicting food systems used to be more around just depicting the food supply chain, right? With some kind of icons that include usually big tractors and a recycling symbol for waste recovery, right? Or for recycling. So here you have food production, distribution, aggregation, processing, marketing, markets and purchasing, preparation and consumption, and resource and waste recovery. And this supply chain actually is shown as a closed-loop system, which is often not the case for our food supply chains, right? Waste is often not reintegrated into the system. It's often a byproduct that becomes a huge long-term problem because we see it as waste and not as resources to reintegrate. So even the way these different component parts are presented on the page makes a really big difference in how we approach these issues. So this is, I would say, a progressive, very simplified version. And there are many, many different ways that food systems can be represented. This is one of my favorites, really demonstrating that system of interconnected and interdependent systems. So you see biological systems becoming economic systems, right? And that integration between them as we farm biological products, for example, and there's a capitalist system under which we're doing that. We have health systems and political systems that are deeply integrated here, or not integrated enough, right? Depending on how you're seeing it. Those different systems are cutting through the processes of farming as farming moves through the social systems, through the networks, through advertising, through access, education, and food culture. That's happening at local to global levels, right? So food systems both encompass multiple systems that interact and occur at multiple levels. So there is no one food system, right? There are multiple food systems. And each time we talk about that, we need to think about where is this occurring, at what scale, who is involved, what are the influences that are driving the food system, and then fundamentally at the center of the second diagram here, what are the outcomes, right? What are the nutrition and health outcomes? What is the literacy outcome in terms of people's familiarity with how to access or grow or prepare or deal with the additional resources at the end? What is the literacy and skill around that? So food systems, of course, is a very broad theme. And this quarter, we're coupling it with biodiversity. So what is biodiversity? Many of you are engaged in study that relates to biodiversity. So you know that biodiversity is essentially the variety of life. It is variability among living organisms from all sources, land and water, and the ecologies, the complex ecologies that they're part of. So biological diversity happens at 3 levels. It happens at the genetic level, within species. It happens at the species level, across species. And then it happens actually at the ecosystemic level, right? And that level, the 3rd level, the ecosystem level, is where we are going to focus this quarter. Now, bringing the 2 concepts together, biodiversity for food and agriculture. shorthand BFA. BFA is a subset of biodiversity that specifically contributes to agriculture and food production, where agriculture is broadly defined as crop and livestock production, but also forestry, fisheries, aquaculture, right? So production of food that's happening really anywhere on Earth. Biodiversity for food production includes all of our domesticated plants and animals. Those are the ones that we're raising really intentionally for food. It also includes wild relatives of our domesticated species. Our domesticated species are often just represent the tiniest of fractions of the genetic potential of that species worldwide, right? And we breed for consistency. And so we breed out the genetic diversity, but that creates a uniform system and brings risks of pests and disease. And so, for example, here in Washington State, we produce the most apples in the United States, in this state, right? We are constantly going back to East Asia, to Afghanistan, to Kazakhstan, and looking for early apple genetic varieties to breed with our current stock to increase disease resilience, right? So the biodiversity for food and agriculture is not just about the domesticated apples we grow, but also about their wild relatives, because we require those genes for a healthy food supply chain. Biodiversity for food and agriculture also incorporates other wild species that are harvested for food and other products. So you might see foraged mushrooms in your grocery store or at your farmer's market, or you might find wild berries for sale or that you pick yourself, right? And it also, importantly, biodiversity for food and agriculture also incorporates the associated biodiversity. So not the food that we're actually going to be consuming, but all the other components of the ecosystems that enable that food to grow and be available for us, right? So this is the vast range of organisms that live in and around production systems, sustaining them and contributing to their output. So examples of associated biodiversity that you are probably really familiar with include pollinators, right? Everyone knows that the bees are in trouble and that we rely on the bees for somewhere between 1/3 to 2/3 of every bite of food that we take. Right? This is an example of associated biodiversity that gets a lot of press. The soil food web is another example of associated biodiversity that's going to get a little bit of airtime this quarter as we have some of our guest speakers talking about soil and the multitude of biological organisms that are living in the soil, decomposing biological matter, engaging in nutrient cycling so that the crops and animals above ground are able to be nourished for our nourishment. So these are examples of associated biodiversity, and collectively, this whole list is what we mean by biodiversity for food and agriculture. So this is not a new coupling, food systems and biodiversity, but other than First Peoples who, since time immemorial, have appreciated that the variety of life is essential to our lives, it is only in the 80s, the 1980s, which seems like forever ago, but I promise you wasn't that long ago, right? It was only in the 80s when politically there started to be a connection between these terms. It started with the Commission on Plant Genetic Resources, and in 1992 we had a really seminal event, global seminal event called the United Nations Earth Summit. That was the nickname that we came up with after that. In this Earth Summit, there was the development of a convention on biological diversity. That was the first time, as far as I know, that there was biological diversity occupied a global stage, and the global community stood up and said, this is an area of importance, right? Now, there have been, through the decades since then, multiple different Millennium Development Goals, multiple global treaties and pacts, strategic plans, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, About a decade ago, we had the Sustainable Development Goals that were adopted. Each of these have kind of been moving us along this ever-growing acknowledgement that biodiversity is essential and deeper understanding of how it's essential, in what ways, right? But now we're at a point where the acknowledgement and the understanding is not enough, right? This is another one of the themes of the quarter. It's not enough to know. What are we going to do about it, right? So in 2019, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, held or published the State of the World's Biodiversity for Food and Agriculture. I think I put it up as a recommended reading or a resource for you for the quarter. And then 3 years later, in December of 2022, there was a landmark UN Biodiversity Conference, and there were some amazing agreements that were reached. And we will talk about that in just a few slides. The reason that this is happening right now is because there's a growing acknowledgement that awareness isn't enough. Acknowledgement, understanding isn't enough. The planet is experiencing a dangerous decline in nature. We know that it's linked to human activity. And more than that, we know that there are different actions that we could take that would lead to different outcomes. The outcomes of today are not necessarily the outcomes of the future. So we are at a pivotal moment, I'm sorry to use that word, where we have to decide what are we going to do with the knowledge that we have, right? How much better could we possibly understand the problem before we act? So I have a recording up here that I'm not going to play in class, but I want to encourage you to click on this link and listen. It's 5 minutes. And the first 2.5 minutes or so, it's from the Commissioner on Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. It's an interview with him. And it lays out really beautifully why biodiversity, what biodiversity is, and why biodiversity is important for food and agriculture, and some of the steep challenges that we face in terms of the ways that we have bred our crops and our animals, so that 9 species of crops comprises 2/3 of what we produce agriculturally. That is mind-blowing when you think about the millions of species that exist in the world, right? We have become such experts at efficiency that we are at risk of losing it all, right? So how do we make sure that we understand the basics and then go forward to action? So I encourage you to listen to that 5-minute interview, because it really lays out both the problem and then starts getting into the solutions, which we are going to spend the quarter working on. We know that the global food system is the primary driver of biodiversity loss, and it is now coupled with climate change. So when we understand the problem, we understand that food systems is both absolute solution space for biodiversity, but it's also a massive contributor to the problem. That is really interesting to think about with respect to climate change as well. Food systems, you can say the same thing about food systems and climate. Food systems, global food systems, are a huge contributor to climate and are a huge solution space for climate, right? So we have this real opportunity, but we need to approach it thoughtfully in a truly transdisciplinary way with an eye and a hand, not a fist, this is not a fist, a hand toward action. All right, so back to that 2019 report. There were 5 key findings. Number 1 is that biodiversity is essential to food and agriculture. It's not just important genetically, it actually has a direct outcome on our food security, on sustainable development. It supplies many vital, what we call ecosystem services. It makes production systems and livelihoods more resilient. We are in an age of increased shocks and stressors on all of our systems, including our human systems. And biodiversity can actually absorb a lot more shocks. Biodiverse environments can absorb a lot more shocks than those that are not biodiverse, that are monocropped or not biologically active at all. Biodiversity is a key resource to increase food production, and limit the negative effects on the environment. One of the key questions that we're all facing today is, how are we going to feed this growing population? Well, that question is not necessarily the right question, right? Because that question kind of leads us down this path of ever increasing efficiency in production without looking at, why don't we feed all the people that we have today with the food that we produce? Because we actually produce enough food today to feed everyone, and somewhere between 20 to 50% of all food is wasted. So it's not a production issue at this point. It's a distribution issue. It's an access issue, right? In the future, when our population continues to soar past 8 million now, right, and gets to 9, 10 million, do we have more land to grow on, to expand out into? No, we have to really critically look at the system and say, why aren't people accessing the food they need and want now? And how can we do it better in the future, right? So that we get the nutrition and broad health outcomes that we truly desire. Access, but also sovereignty, right? Equity around decisions about what kinds of food we want to be able to access, how it's produced, having agency in our food system so that it can build ourselves, our families, our communities in really robust ways. So biodiversity promotes resilience, improves livelihoods, supports food security, nutrition. That was just the first finding, people. There's 4 more key findings. I'm going to encourage you to spend time on these to understand that there are multiple interacting drivers of change that are affecting biodiversity for food and agriculture, that it's declining at all those levels that we talked about, genetic, species, and ecosystem, and at the same time, there's a lot of good news. There's actually increasing biodiversity-friendly practices being used, right? It's not yet enough, but we're starting to trend in that direction. And yet, we still don't have these enabling frameworks where there is absolute deep understanding and buy-in, especially amongst politicians, that biodiversity is essential, including that associated biodiversity, right? Including the wild relatives of the foods that we grow. And that is a real opportunity to bring everybody up to speed and move it forward. So, from the 2019 report that was really seminal, there was this theory of change framework that they developed, right? Where we move from the current status, which is that we have an unprecedented biodiversity loss resulting from human activity that is jeopardizing our well-being. Let's not fool ourselves. It's actually not jeopardizing the planet. This is a totally self-serving focus. The planet will persist, right? But we want to save ourselves, and we want to have a good time while we're doing it. We want to have our friends and our family and our communities be healthy and be able to enjoy a stable climate and a good life, right? So all of this is about human well-being, ultimately. In the short term, of course, there's lots of suffering all around, but ultimately we are focused on preserving biodiversity for our own sake. That's the truth. There's intrinsic value in biodiversity. I'm not arguing that we shouldn't protect biodiversity for its own sake, but for biodiversity, for food and agriculture, this is about saving humans, centering the potential, our true potential for beautiful lives. So how do we go from the current status of today, where we're in jeopardy, to 2050, which is not that far from now, to this beautiful vision of living in harmony with nature? How do we get there, right? So there's these different conditions of responsibility and transparency. These are the enabling conditions that will allow us to move. This is the idea, the theory of change, the kind of positing of how we can move this forward so that we reach these particular milestones and really transform the path that we're on. And there are scientists around the world and communities around the world who know and believe and are working toward this new vision. So, December 2022, I think probably some of you heard about this. It was very big news. There was a conference of parties, COP15, to the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, and there was an adoption of a global biodiversity framework. It is unprecedented, and it is a huge deal. It's hugely exciting, right? One of the things that got the most press is this 30 by 30 outcome. That 30% of land and waterways should be conserved by 2030. Like, when is that? Like in how many minutes? That's a big deal. 30% of our land and waterways, there's a global agreement that those should be conserved by 2030. And there are lots of other goals that were articulated within this framework, actually 4 goals and 23 targets, such that we change the economic system that actually incentivizes biodiversity loss, and we cut food waste in half, right? We start with the problems that we can really do something about in our own homes, in our own supply chains. Because we know that without these action, there's going to be a further loss of biodiversity and incredible loss of ecosystem services beyond that. So out of those 23 targets, many of them relate to food systems, and actually the one required reading for today, or strongly recommended reading for today, is a 2-page op-ed or editorial comment by Steve Gleasman, one of the, grandparents of agroecology in this country, and he laid out in this really succinct way the opportunity, the challenge, and the opportunity of bringing biodiversity and food systems together and galvanizing on this moment, on this year, on the years ahead until 2030 to make these changes. So he actually lists all the targets that relate to food systems, but I'll just show you target 10, which is about food production. The target is ensuring that areas under food production management are managed sustainably, in particular through the sustainable use of biodiversity, including through increasing biodiversity-friendly practices such as sustainable intensification, so growing more on the same plot of land, and that often can include growing more different species in proximity to one another. Using agricultural methods that are learning from our ecological systems. So agroecological methods that contribute to food production, but also system resilience. And making sure that there's conserving and restoring biodiversity and maintaining nature's contributions. I have to show you all something. I didn't have time to put it into my slide, but this came into my inbox like 5 minutes before the seminar. Biden-Harris administration makes available historic $3 billion for climate-smart practices on agricultural lands through Investing in America agenda. So this is part of the kind of a much bigger bills that are being pushed through, but there is a huge focus on how can we grow in ways that support climate, and in this, also support biodiversity, right? One of the big challenges that we have in the United States is actually that we are not a signatory to COP15. Before I tell you that, I'll just say this is one of the punchlines of my talk that I wanted to leave you with today, is that thinking about food production and thinking about sustainable food systems that promote biodiversity, there is not one single answer. And don't believe anyone who tells you that there is, okay? Don't believe that veganism is always better than vegetarianism, is always better than being an omnivore. Don't believe it the other way around either, right? There are many different ways to eat, and we each need to make those decisions based on how we were raised, what we value, what's available to us, right? All of those, there are so many elements that impact our food choices, but there is not one right way to eat. And in fact, one of my favorite groups, the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, or IPES Food, they have this beautiful report about agroecology and diversity, saying how we produce the food matters more than the food that we produce. If there's a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet that is comprised mostly of derivatives of soy and corn, guess what? That does not help biodiversity. It also doesn't help climate, right? If you, on the other hand, you have somebody, who has another version of a diet that is restrictive, it probably is excluding a lot of the ecosystem potential of integrating different plants and animals together so that nutrient cycling can actually happen within the same site, above and below ground. We'll have a chance to get into this with some of our speakers as well. But now the world is really mobilized around COP15. It's time to get to work. It's time to move this historic decision forward. And then we can let out our breaths. I shared this with you just a moment before, a little too early, but not every single country in the world signed on to this. The United States and Rome didn't sign on to it. I don't have anything to say about Rome, okay? But the United States didn't sign on to it. Right? This is an opportunity for all of you who are living in the United States to potentially raise your voices, to potentially learn more about why not, and should we sign on? Every other country in the world essentially has signed on to this. So the United States has put out a lot of press saying, hey, 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 we still value biodiversity. Whoa, 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 we're not the bad guys here. Okay, we didn't sign on, but we actually have. There was a whole report put out just when the COP15 was happening, highlighting U.S. efforts to combat the biodiversity crisis. There was another big report that came out this year, Opportunities to Accelerate Nature-Based Solutions, a roadmap for climate progress, thriving nature, equity, and prosperity. And even in the national security strategy of the United States of America, it says the climate crisis is the existential challenge of our time. And reading to the end, without immediate action, we will lock in further extreme heat and weather, rising sea levels, and catastrophic biodiversity loss, right? That's part of our national strategic strategy. That's wild. That's really important, and that gives us an opportunity to raise our voices and keep pushing this administration and future administrations to have global buy-in and participate in the global community. There's a lot of really good work that's popping up or that's getting more press now that we have this global agreement, and even in the United States, there's a push toward conservation and biodiversity, and that is what we're going to spend the quarter investigating together. I'm so excited to share this speaker list with you. It is really just a lineup of stellar researchers, practitioners, community leaders who are actively investigating and developing solutions to promote biodiversity in our food and agriculture. So I'm not going to go over each one, but know that you are in for very big treats. And each one of these is planned to be in person, except for November 10th and November 17th. So November 10th, will probably be a pre-recorded session that will just be available to you. We don't have class on that day because of Memorial Day on the 11th. So hopefully Dr. Bernhardt's talk on seafood biodiversity and human health will just be available as an extra class for you as you have time. And then on November 17th, we have Dr. Marnie Isaac, who'll be zooming in from the University of Toronto. But beyond that, and just hang on, and we don't have class scheduled on Indigenous Peoples Day, the day after Thanksgiving on that Friday, but I encourage you just to eat good food and watch the movie Gather, which is available on many different streaming platforms. A few more slides, and I have 2 minutes, so just hang in there. You know we have classes every Friday. We have these 3 planned exceptions to our in-person classes. Communicate with Jorge and myself on Canvas and Canvas messaging only, please. And if you need additional support, then just let us know, right? You're going to have a number of assignments and opportunities so that you can meet your learning objectives, which is really about keeping an open mind and bringing your best critical thinking to the topic of our seminar. Nutrition 400 and 500 have different assignments but the same format. There are going to be 8 opportunities to submit a half-page reflection on the speaker that incorporates their pre-readings. So 8 opportunities, and you need to submit 5. Okay? And then there'll be a 1-page paper due at the end that's asking for some synthesis and your reflections on the seminar overall. So I hope it's not too arduous, and the details of that will be released next week because your first assignment is not due until after the first guest speaker. Please spend time on Canvas. There's lots of information there. If you still have questions, definitely write to Jorge and I. And finally, I will just leave you with this amazing reflection on my lecture today that Jorge generated 3 days ago on ChatGPT. I will assure you that we know how ChatGPT reads, and it reads without specificity, and it reads as though multiple people have written it, and it reads without any specific reference to what a speaker says or what is mentioned and the links that they're making to what is mentioned in articles. So we know there are a lot of tools out there. You are not forbidden from anything. Obviously, it's not my place to do that, but I want to encourage you to use this class as an opportunity to practice your thinking or your critical thinking, translating it into writing, succinct, pithy reflections, and making connections between what you're learning here, what you're studying, and what's important to you in life. Because otherwise, what are you doing in university? Am I right? Thank you so much for your attention, everyone. I really look forward to the quarter ahead, and I hope you have a beautiful sunny weekend. Take care.